Today I'm going to be reacting to a video that was just dropped by my buddy, the other Paul. If you guys don't know the lead up or the kind of the story behind this video, the guy on the cover here, his name is Ben. He has a channel called Cleave to Antiquity, and he was a Protestant for a long time. He was actually a pastor at an evangelical church, and he did Protestant apologetics on YouTube. Well, eventually, he converted to Eastern Orthodoxy, and there was a lot of drama surrounding this because a lot of people thought that, maybe he had been secretly kind of converting while still making Protestant apologetic videos, and people accused him of misleading his audience and yada, 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 all these things. Well, I don't really care about all that. I wasn't around for all of that. I'm newer to the space than that. All I've ever known is that Cleave is an Orthodox guy. But Cleave has kind of propped himself up as like this destroyer of Protestantism, okay, which is what makes this video specifically so interesting to watch. Cleave has said a lot of bad things about Protestantism, a lot of bad things about Protestant apologists, and the other Paul thoroughly debunks his claims in this video. So let's get into this. You guys got to go check out the entire video, though. I'm going to be able to go through just a few moments of this video, but you guys got to go check out the entire thing. Let's get into this. By the way, this intro, like, come on now. Come on, this is next level stuff. I mean, just great job to Paul. This is next level stuff. This is hilarious.
Mr. Anderson.
Run, Neo, run.
I love that. That's my favorite. That's my favorite part. Gotta pause this so you guys can read it. Paul edited this a little quick right here. Oh. Normativity, epistemology, debate dire. That's funny, man.
What is he doing?
He's beginning to be. Can't be.
What a baller intro, man.
Benny boy.
What I love about this video is that Paul, he really lets his personality show through, which a lot of YouTubers, I feel like they're afraid to do. They make everything so rigid, and so this is my argument. But Paul really, like, he just lets his personality through, and maybe for better or worse. There's a couple moments in the video here where he's pretty aggressive, and it might not be your cup of tea, and that's fine. But I really appreciate that he's like, yeah, do the funny edit at the beginning. Benny boy. Like, I think it's good, and it makes his channel feel like it has a character, to it, which I love.
You have made a big mistake, buddy. Most of you viewers are probably acquainted with my new direction on the channel, specifically focused on responding to the Orthobro sect of Eastern apologists, as well as other more good faith, intellectually minded Easterners. There was my big video on the Orthodox Avengers, there was my debate with Alex
Great video right here. Definitely recommend. Highly recommend. Great video.
Soren, as well as a few discussions on other channels.
Oh, look, there we are. These are great. So these are the two videos that Paul's done with us on this channel so far. This first one up here, he also released on his channel, but it's basically a look at the history of Nicaea and how the history of Nicaea really makes Orthodox reception theory a hard sell. It's not like a total disprover of reception theory, but it makes it a very hard sell. So this is a very good video to go watch. This down here is actually another video responding to Cleave to Antiquity and his Protestant dilemma that he posted on X. And another guy that was on this video was Sean Luke from Anglican Aesthetics, another friend of the channel. So check out both of these. These other videos are great too, but they're not on our channel, so you take it or leave it.
Naturally, this has led to me being a target of Orthobro fan hate, no shock, as well as some blunt responses by their big apologists. Normally, someone in my position would be pressured to back out due to the hate storm that responding to these apologists regularly attracts, and many people have backed out for those reasons. Unfortunately for them, God decided to cross an Australian with a Lebo and create me. One of these big apologists who's had a crack at me is Cleave to Antiquity, a recent convert to the Photian sect from...
See, like that right there. That's great. That's so great. I love that he just does stuff like that. He doesn't even care. That's fun.
A non-denominational gathering.
Okay, so he's just gonna keep explaining. Let's go through some of the timestamps here. So, yes, I remember that point. Lies about Father James. I remember that one. Branch theory. This is a really good one. We'll start here.
Proven innocent.
Look at literally the first ecumenical.
So this is a clip that he's taken from Ben, and Ben is going to be basically trying to disprove branch theory or say that it has its problems, and Paul is going to debunk that.
Council and what they believe, and then apply that to any of the Protestant denominations. So they presuppose bishops. You got bishops? Check this off the list. All right. Any denomination that does not have bishops, they can immediately be discarded. Okay. This is in the First Ecumenical Council. They have penances. Okay. You know what else they have? If you read the creed itself, one holy Catholic apostolic church. What do they mean by this? Do they mean branch theory? Do they mean a bunch of different churches that are not actually in communion? We can just kind of slap the label one church on there. No, it's one church that's in full visible communion. This is the faith of the First Ecumenical Council.
That's a non sequitur, by the way. Doesn't have to be in full visible communion.
Faith of the early Christians, the faith of the apostles. But he would probably say, well, I do believe in no salvation outside of the church. I'm just going to redefine the church to be a bunch of different institutions that aren't in visible communion with each other, because he holds to branch theory.
I need only restate my response in the Orthodox Avengers video. Ben is attacking what he refuses to study. He throws around potshots at branch theory without ever studying or critiquing its actual substance and the arguments proposed for it, especially by its chief expositor, William Palmer, in his A Treatise on the Church of Christ. Maybe Ben can't handle the higher register English. Maybe he's scared that it will challenge his paradigm. Or, most likely, Ben just doesn't have intellectual virtues, even the basic obligation of studying before critiquing. I will here quote a couple of summary statements from William Palmer on the nature of branch theory. These are not on their own exhaustive, only a summary. He provides a detailed walkthrough of scriptural and patristic arguments for and against the theory, on top of the long discussion on the nature of the church that undergirds that very theory. From Volume 1, Part 1, Section 4. If this external communion must always exist uninterruptedly, it must be from a very remarkable exercise of divine power, because we know from Scripture that the Church was to comprise evil men as well as good, and no one pretends that its members were to be exempt from frailties, passions, errors, ignorance. These circumstances would be very liable occasionally to cause divisions in the church, and it is credible that in some case the fault and the justification might be so equally divided between two parties that it might be impossible to affirm that either was involved in the guilt of formal schism. There is therefore no impossibility of division in the church itself, if we regard the persons of whom it is constituted. And the only way in which this impossibility can be proved is by evidence of some divine promise to that effect. I proceed to consider the doctrine of Catholic tradition, and here also, as we might have anticipated, the position of our opponents is entirely unsupported. That the fathers and councils of the Church do not affirm that the Church can never be divided in point of external communion, we may conclude from the very quotations adduced by the Romish theologians, Nicole, Tourneley, Bailey, etc., in proof of their assumption. For they are silent on the very point in debate. It is in vain to adduce passages from the Fathers where they speak of the Catholic Church as one communion, from which all heretics and schismatics are cut off. Who disputes that heretics and schismatics are not of the Church, and that the Church was generally one communion in fact? The only question is whether it could ever be troubled by divisions. The innumerable exhortations and arguments of the fathers in favor of unity, their denunciations of those who separated from the whole church or whom the church condemned, these are entirely received and approved by us, but they do not touch the question in debate, namely, whether the Catholic Church itself may not at some time be divided in point of external communion.
And I think that's a really good point. Obviously, Paul could probably just explain this better than me, but nobody in Protestantism is arguing that the church was at one time one single visible institution. The question is not whether that was the case. The question is whether that must always continue to be the case, especially since in Scripture it is predicted by the apostles that evil men would rise up within the church. Okay, not from outside of it, not schismatics, but actually from within it. Then we can clearly see, as Palmer said there, that division might be necessary if that is the case. So the Bible predicts that evil men will rise up. It gives us remedies for that by either kicking them out or by avoiding them, it says, if they are obstinate. And so then we can see how in the future, visible communion could be separated, from people who are actually within the church, those evil men that were predicted by Scripture.
Again, that is just his summary case. If you want his full arguments, you can find the full text online very easily. But I can speak to the issue myself. While I cannot yet comment on the patristic evidence because I'm intellectually honest, and unlike Ben, I don't prioritize the algorithm over research.
That is very true, what Paul just said there. Paul is very honest about what he has and has not studied. And I can speak to this just from behind the curtain a little bit. Times when I've asked Paul to come on the channel or, say, hey, can we do this or that topic? Multiple times he said, I'm not going to do that topic because I haven't done the reading on that yet. Or I'm getting into that, but I want to figure out this first before I talk about that topic. He's very rigorous in how he presents information and very careful that he does it in the correct way. So that I appreciate that so much about Paul.
I can comment on the scriptural case. Nowhere does Scripture promise that the church will always subsist in one visible administrative institution.
That's correct. That's the point. It's not that one visible institution is not the ideal. It's not that we don't want that. It's not like Protestants are like, we hate the idea of visible union. That's horrible. No, it's just that Scripture doesn't tell us that it essentially must be so. And so given the historical record, we don't believe then that Protestantism is falsified by the visible divisions that have happened, because Scripture does not promise that is like an entailment of the true church.
It does frequently speak of the necessity of unity in mind and spirit, in right doctrine, and our general relations with one another.
Yes, and I think the Scripture, when it speaks of union or unity in any sense, I mean, almost every single time is talking about a unity of spirit, of mind, and a unity in doctrine. I think it's a very, very tough case to make that it's talking about a unity of institution.
But it never says that the church subsists essentially in a particular network of administratively linked hierarchies. While I would agree that this is the ideal, and we had something approaching this in the early church, mainly post-Nicaea, but that's for a deeper dive later on, it is never stated as essential, such that someone outside of this formal network, whether layman or clergy, is ipso facto outside of the true church of Jesus Christ, even visibly. Rather, as Palmer said, it is perfectly conceivable that certain splits may have faults on both sides, while yet leaving other subordinate leaders on both sides without damning fault. Or true Christian laymen may have no other communion physically available to them except their local parish, which recently schismed from the wider communion, or there could even be voluntary agreements on administrative distinction along with mutual recognition of each other's valid status, like between many Anglican, Lutheran, Presbyterian, and Continental Reformed jurisdictions to this day.
I want to jump to another section. This is probably my favorite section. Let me see here. I think it's right around here.
The name of that declaration, I'm going to have
Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of the overview of this section that we're about to watch. I think this is probably the strongest section of the entire video. And essentially, he pulls these clips from Cleave, where Cleave says that the Anglican Church is in schism because of certain actions that they took. Paul then goes on to show that literally the exact same actions were taken by the Orthodox Church in Russia. So check this out.
I have to pull that up again. What is the name of that declaration of King Henry, who was the head of the church after this declaration? It was the Great something. Let me pull this up. Hold on one moment. So King Henry puts forth the Act of Supremacy 1534, states that King Henry is the only supreme head of the church, the Anglican Church or Church of England, and he has alone the right to choose the bishops. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. This seems like he's forming his own church. He even gives it its own name and changes the way that the bishops are elected. And oh, what does he start doing? He starts dissolving monasteries. Wait a minute. He starts dissolving the lands that were owned by the Roman Catholics. Says the lands and wealth of the Roman Catholics are basically his. So this seems like breaking off from the Roman Catholic Church. So they're a schism of a schism, because the Roman Catholics are schismatics. It's the Roman Patriarchate that left the other four patriarchates. One of the bigger issues is he's levying the charge of question begging, but this is a conversation where we're assuming everybody has the relevant intelligence to understand that the Anglicans are schismatic. This is kind of an internal discussion. This isn't like an external apologetic, right? I mean, it can be taken as such, but the topic of the video isn't to define whether or not Anglicans in specific are schismatic or to define the schism of every single Protestant group. Now, if we wanted to talk about that, we can. And I've already presented one piece of evidence here, the Act of Supremacy, 1534. Promulgated by King Henry, which was basically his act of separation from the Roman Catholic Church to establish the Anglican Church, the Church of England, with him as the head.
Ben, you are an actual dropkick. Okay. Fellas and ladies, if the last section on Eastern ecumenism was little boy, then this section is fat man. To continue the analogy, let's start the ignition phase. At the outset, Ben doesn't even know the basic details of the English Reformation. The fact that he struggled to remember the 1534 Act of Supremacy shows as much, let alone the fact that he thinks it's the first big act in the whole situation. But also remember how he categorized it. Henry formed his own church, he gave it its own name, and changed the way the bishops are elected, and dissolved the monasteries. Therefore, Henry and the Church of England broke off from the Roman Catholic Church. Let's run through these claims. First, Henry didn't give the Church of England its own name. That is so unbelievably stupid a claim that I was surprised even Ben made it. Henry used the standard term for the Church of England that was used frequently prior to his reign. Anglicana Ecclesia, or Ecclesia Anglicana, Latin.
Okay. I'm going to skip forward to this section because he spends this time right here defending the Anglican schism. But then what I really want to get to is now you've heard what Cleave said about the Anglicans. Now Paul's going to get into how the Eastern Orthodox Church of Russia did the exact same thing.
Now you might be thinking, wow, that was quite devastating, Paul. Surely Ben will never recover. And you would be right. But back to the atomic bomb analogy, we have only just ended the detonation stage. Now, we arrive at supercriticality and the nuclear chain reaction. A flash of extreme thermal radiation, prompt ionizing radiation, and a colossal blast wave, which together wipe out every living thing within a 1 kilometer radius. I am completely mentally stable. You can trust me with your unattended fissile material. For legal reasons, this is a joke. I am not planning on stealing nuclear material from the Lucas Heights reactor facility on July 20. There is an episode of Eastern Orthodox history, specifically Russian Orthodoxy, but with implications for the whole communion, that I have never seen raised in these discussions and only learned about through my Romanist friend and fellow history buff Alan Rule, whom you should follow if you really like your Crusades history in particular. Despite this, the episode is utterly devastating towards naive modern Photian claims, especially their anti-Reformation polemics, and especially in their anti-Anglican polemics. Let me introduce you all to Peter the Great, the Tsar of Russia from 1682 and the first Emperor of Russia, of the new Russian Empire, from 1721 until his death in 1725. He would become renowned for his military feats and his reforms, both political and ecclesiastical. Peter the Great had a grand tour of Western Europe in 1697 and 1698, traveling from Prussia to as far as England. During that time, he was inspired by the state and ecclesial structures of the Western European churches, in ways that would become very important a couple of decades later. Simultaneously, a certain Russian academic named Feofan Prokopovich was studying in Western Europe, including in Rome itself, and himself became a uniate to do so, or an Eastern Christian who accepts the authority of the Pope, to speak simplistically. After this, he would also study at the University of Halle, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right,
Halle,
in Germany, where he would be exposed to Reformation thought, especially Lutheran theology, although he would return to Russian Orthodoxy properly and fully upon his return to, well, Russia. Nonetheless, his Roman and Lutheran influences would have significant consequences in the future. In 1700, Patriarch Adrian of Moscow and all the Rus died. Ordinarily, a successor would be appointed, but none would come because Tsar Peter refused to appoint one. So already we see that the Tsar controlled the appointment of the single most important bishop in the Russian Orthodox Church.
So you guys can see what he's doing. He's drawing parallels between Cleave's example from history about Anglicanism and their schism to exactly what happened in the Russian Orthodox Church. Same thing, the king controlling the church, and he's going to go on to talk about how the king essentially demolished, or the Tsar, I should say, demolished an entire patriarchy of Russia and replaced it with a synod that he fabricated, and it lasted for hundreds of years.
Sounds a bit schismatic, eh, Ben? But it gets even worse, friends. In 1701, Peter the Great established the monastery office, in which all the financial and administrative affairs of the monasteries were governed. This was attempted by his father Alexis in 1649, but was aggressively opposed by the then Patriarch Nikon, precisely because it effectively meant state seizure of the monasteries. That would eventually fail, but now that Patriarch Adrian had died, who was himself an opponent of westernization, especially in his 1690 patriarchal letter, according to scholarly summaries, Peter was free to simply withhold appointing a new patriarch and go ahead with enforcing state control over the monasteries. Sounds eerily similar to Henry VIII, doesn't it? Only it's the Tsar of Russia over the Russian Orthodox Church. And that wouldn't be the end of it. In 1764, Tsarina Catherine the Great published what is commonly called the Secularization Decree, wherein the already strict state control of the monasteries was transformed into a complete wealth and property transfer of the monasteries to the state. In other words, a blatantly schismatic act according to Cleave to Antiquity standards. But this isn't even close to the most damning episode. In 1721, Peter the Great, how do I even say this? He abolished the Patriarchate of Moscow and all the Rus. Gone. Poof. Just like that. A whole patriarchate just erased from the map. And in its place, he established the Most Holy Synod, a standing council of bishops over the Russian Orthodox Church in the place of the Patriarch, and which was itself supremely governed by the Tsar of Russia, and, not long after Peter the Great, through a lay head of the council. This would remain the case until the Patriarchate's restoration in 1917. Almost 200 years later. The aforementioned Feofan Prokopovich, by now a bishop, authored the Spiritual Regulation, the central text that established the Most Holy Synod and its authority and functions. Among other things, it describes the Synod as individuals assembled for the general welfare by the command of the autocrat, the Tsar of Russia, and under his scrutiny jointly with others. And it also shows Feofan's Lutheran scholarly influence by requiring a re-examination of the lives of the saints in order to expose fabricated tales, as well as a de-emphasis on monasticism and strict regulations on the practice. I could say much more about Feofan, but I will refrain from that before fully studying his life and teachings.
So that's just a brief look at the other Paul's new video, specifically responding to Cleave to Antiquity, but also just online Orthodox arguments in general. You guys got to go check it out. Make sure you're subscribed here to the Reformation Response. The other Paul is a friend of the channel. He'll be back on again soon. So if you want to catch new videos with the other Paul here on this channel, make sure that you're subscribed. And of course, subscribe to the other Paul. Watch this video, drop a comment, W Pauls in the chat. We'll see you guys next time.